New York never sleeps, but that night the streets held their breath, because the wrong man was about to take the right throne. You ever notice how a city has a pulse? Most people don't think about it. They're too busy chasing their own heartbeat, running for the subway, Logan in some smoky corner of a bar, fighting over cab fare. But if you've been in this life long enough, if you've walked these streets the way I have, you learn the city's got a rhythm. And when that rhythm changes, you feel it in your bones. That night back in the early 30s, I felt it. New York wasn't humming the way it usually did. It wasn't singing. It was whispering. The rain had been falling since noon, thin at first, then heavy, then back to a drizzle, and by midnight the pavement was black glass. Street lamps threw little halos on the sidewalks, and the reflections of neon signs trembled in every puddle. It was the kind of night where a man like me could walk 3 blocks and hear his own footsteps. No laughter from the corner bars. No piano music floating through a half-open door. Just the hiss of tires on wet asphalt and the occasional cough of some night watchman making his rounds. I kept my hands in my coat pockets, hat pulled low, coat collar up. Not 'cause I was worried about catching cold, but because I wasn't ready for anybody to see the look on my face. Not yet. See, by then I'd been moving pieces for years. And I'm not talking about chess, though maybe it was something like that. I'd been setting up moves, watching the board, making trades, talking risks. All of it led into this night. And the city knew something was coming. It just didn't know my name was stamped on it. When you've lived in New York your whole life, you know what silence means. It means the wrong people are out, or the wrong people ain't. And that night, both were true. The old bosses, the ones who thought the city was carved up for good, they were sitting in their fancy apartments thinking they had the future under control. But the truth? Their time was already over. They just hadn't read the obituary yet. I passed Delancey Street, where I grew up hustling for pocket change. Back then it was full of pushcarts and shouting vendors, the smell of garlic and onions in the air, and the sound of kids running in the gutter. Tonight it was empty. Even the stray cats were keeping to the shadows. It made me think about the old neighborhood, how I'd gone from running errands for a nickel to shaking hands with politicians who owed me favors. And I'll tell you something, that climb, it don't come without scars. There was a time when every corner in this city had its own boss. Maybe he wasn't wearing a fedora or driving a Packard, but he had his little kingdom, a block, a building, a racket. And if you wanted to survive, you either played along or you disappeared. I learned early on that survival meant keeping your mouth shut, your ears open, and your pockets deep enough to pull out something useful when the moment came. The rain let up just as I turned onto a narrow side street. Dim light from a second-story window spilled onto the slick cobblestones. Somewhere above me, a phonograph was playing slow, scratchy jazz. I stopped for a second, listening. That's the thing about the city, even in the quiet, it's talking to you. Sometimes it's warning you. Sometimes it's inviting you in. That night, I couldn't tell which one it was. I thought about the men I'd met along the way, the ones who taught me the ropes, the ones I outlived, the ones who'd try to outlive me. Guys like Meyer Lansky, who could read a man's soul just by watching the way he handled a deck of cards. Or Bugsy Siegel, who smiled like the sun was always churning but had ice water in his veins. We were young then, but we weren't kids. We knew what we wanted, and we knew what it would cost. The funny thing about nights like this, the quiet ones, is they don't last. They're just the breath before the punch lands. And I could feel the punch coming. The city was shifting. The old ways, the ones brought over from Sicily with the first wave of immigrants, they were cracking. The feuds, the blood oaths, the blind loyalty to men who thought being feared was the same as being respected, that was all about to change. As I walked, I pictured the skyline, all those towers pushing up into the fog like they were reaching for something better. That's what I wanted for this thing of ours, not just scraps, not just a corner or a block. I wanted an empire that could stand next to any on Wall Street and not flinch. I lit a cigarette and leaned against the lamppost, watching the glow cut through the damp air. Across the street, a car rolled by slow, tires hissing, windows dark. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something. In this life, you learn not to guess out loud. The thing about talking power is it's not about who's got the most muscle. Muscle can be bought, muscle can be scared, muscle can be buried. No, real power is about who can see 3 moves ahead and who's willing to take the step everyone else is too scared to take. And in a few nights, I was gonna take that step. But for now, I just stood there, listening to the rain drip from the fire escapes, smelling the faint hint of coal smoke in the air, letting the city settle in my bones. Because I knew once I made my move, there'd be no more quiet nights like this. Every step would echo. Every shadow would have eyes in it. And every man in New York would know my name. When I finally turned to leave, the wind had picked up. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed, long, lonely, then gone. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking. The streets might have been silent that night, but in my head I could already hear the noise of what was coming. They called me Salvatore Lucania, but that name wasn't built for the streets. The streets gave me a better one, and I had to bleed for it. People like to think I was born lucky. That ain't true. I was born Salvatore, a name my mother whispered like a prayer, a name my father carried across the Atlantic like it meant something more than a mouth to feed. We came from a little place in Sicily where the sun baked the stones till they glowed and the men spoke in low voices about things kids weren't supposed to hear. I was just 9 years old when we left, crammed onto a ship with hundreds of other souls chasing the dream they called America. You ever smelled the docks in New York in the summer? It's a mix of salt water, fish guts, coal smoke, and sweat. That was my first taste of the city. We landed in the Lower East Side, where the buildings leaned in like they were trying to listen to your business. Tenements stacked on tenements. Windows so close you could hear the neighbor coughing at night. Every language in the world spilling out of the streets: Italian, Yiddish, Irish slang, German curses. The thing about the Lower East Side, it didn't care where you came from. The only thing that mattered was whether you could hold your ground. And if you couldn't, you got stepped on. My father worked long hours as a plasterer. My mother kept the house, scrubbing and cooking and keeping us in line. But the rent didn't care how hard you worked. The butcher didn't take pity. So I learned quick that the streets had their own economy, one made of hustles, favors, and a little bit of nerve. By 12, I was running errands for the older boys, carrying packages, passing notes, collecting from shopkeepers who suddenly forgot to pay what they owed. I kept my head down, my ears open, and my hands ready. Money came fast and went faster. But it wasn't about the coins in my pocket, it was about knowing I could earn them when I needed to. Then came the day that changed my name. I was 17, walking home from a card game with a few bucks in my pocket when a couple of Irish boys jumped me. Wrong block, wrong time. I held my own for a minute, got a few swings in, but they had numbers, and they had knives. One of them caught me across the cheek, another in the side. I went down hard. They must have thought I was finished, 'cause they left me in the gutter. But I didn't die. Hell, I didn't even pass out for long. Some old lady found me and dragged me inside. Couple weeks later, I was back on the street, stitches still itching, ribs still sore. And that's when I heard it, "Hey, there goes Lucky." At first I thought they were mocking me. But it stuck. Maybe 'cause I lived through something I shouldn't have. Maybe 'cause people like to believe in fate. Either way, Salvatore Lucania faded, and Lucky Luciano was born. The name fit better. Salvatore was the boy my ma called in for dinner. Lucky was the man the street called when something needed doing. And the street kept calling. I started building a little crew. Nothing big at first, a few guys who could throw hands, keep their mouths shut, and understood the value of $1. We ran small rackets, dice games in alleys, hot goods out of basements, protection for shopkeepers who didn't want to find their windows smashed. Every dollar got reinvested, not in banks, but in people. A good cop on the take was worth more than $100 in the till. A favor owed by a bartender could keep you in the loop on who was talking too much. The thing is, I never thought small. While other kids my age were blowing their cash on suits they couldn't afford, I was watching how the bigger boys operated. Guys like the Morello brothers, who kept order in certain parts of Harlem. Or the Jewish gangs over on Rivington, who ran their own little empires with precision. I wasn't afraid to cross lines. That's how I met Meyer Lansky. We were teenagers, standing across from each other in the middle of a street, about to start a brawl between our crews. But then we started talking. He had brains. I had hustle. We saw something in each other. We called off the fight, shook hands, and started thinking bigger. With Meyer came other connections. Benny Siegel, crazy as they came, but fearless. Together we started dabbling in bigger scores. Not just petty theft, real money. And when Prohibition rolled in, it was like the sky opened and poured gold. But that's a story for the next chapter. For now I'll tell you this, I didn't become lucky because I was untouchable. I became lucky because I learned how to make my own luck. I knew when to duck, when to hit, and when to walk away. I learned that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about seeing 3 moves ahead, keeping your friends close and your enemies closer, and sometimes knowing which was which. I remember sitting on the fire escape one summer night, looking out over the city. The streetlights glowed like little stars, and the air was thick with heat and the smell of frying onions from somebody's kitchen. I thought about where I'd been, the ship from Sicily, the tenement halls, the gutter where I should have bled out, and where I was going. I didn't know all the details yet, but I knew one thing, this city was mine for the taking. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon. And when that day came, the name Lucky Luciano was gonna mean something, not just on my block, not just in my borough, but from the Bronx to Brooklyn, from Jersey to Staten Island. It all started with that beating. The one that could have ended me but didn't. Funny how the worst nights of your life can be the first steps toward the best. And so Salvatore was gone. Lucky was here. And New York? New York was about to learn my name. School taught you how to read books, the streets taught me how to read men, and believe me, the streets had better teachers. You hear people say the streets'll chew you up and spit you out. That's true if you don't learn their language. See, I went to school like any other kid, learned my ABCs, a little arithmetic, the kind of stuff that helps you count your change and read the headlines. But my real education? That came from the sidewalk, the back alleys, the corners where the smoke never clears. Every day after class, I'd put down my books and pick up the lessons that mattered: how to spot a tail without tinning your head, how to tell when a man's bluffing without him opening his mouth, how to keep your hands busy so nobody notices you're listening more than you're talking. Meyer Lansky was one of my professors. Not officially, of course, but the way that kid thought, it was like he saw the world through numbers and angles. He could size up a game before the cards even hit the table. I'd watch him take down guys twice his age, never raising his voice, never breaking a sweat. And Bugsy Siegel, he was a different kind of teacher. Benny was all fire, all nerve. If Meyer taught me patience, Bugsy taught me speed, when to move, when to strike, when to make sure the other guy didn't get back up. We weren't just running around knocking over candy stores. We were studying the whole operation of the city, who controlled what, which cops were on the take, which shopkeepers could be leaned on, and which ones were better left alone because they had friends you didn't want to make enemies of. There's an art to it. You can't just bully your way to the top. Sure, fear works in the short term, but respect, earned respect, that lasts. And in our world, respect was built on reliability. If you said you'd deliver something, you delivered. If you promised protection, you showed up when it mattered. If you shook on a deal, you kept it unless you had a damn good reason not to, and even then you handled it quiet. Around this time, Prohibition was starting to take shape in whispers. The grown-ups talked about it like a storm on the horizon. To us, it sounded like opportunity knocking with both fists. Alcohol had always been part of the city's heartbeat: weddings, funerals, Saturday nights. The idea that the government was gonna dry the place out? All that meant was that whoever could get their hands on liquor was gonna own the keys to the kingdom. We started small. A few crates from a dock worker who owed us a favor. A truck that broke down in the right alley, its driver looking the other way while we unloaded. Meyer kept the books, Benny handled the muscle, and I made the connections. It was like running a business, only our board meetings were in the back of a deli, and our quarterly reports came in the form of envelopes stuffed with cash. But business wasn't just about money. It was about building a network. I made it a point to know people outside my own crowd: Irish dockmen, Jewish bookmakers, even a few uptown types who liked to play gangster on the weekends. That's how I learned the first big rule of the street college: never limit your alliances to people who look like you or talk like you. Money don't have a nationality. I also learned how fast things could turn. One night, we were running a card game in a basement off Hester Street when a couple of local punks decided they wanted in on the action. They came in loud, talking about how we were on their turf. Benny reached for his piece, but I waved him off. Instead, I invited them to sit down. Told them if they were so sure they could play, here was their chance. 2 hours later, Meyer had cleaned them out so bad they didn't even have cab fare home. We walked M upstairs, shook their hands, and sent M on their way. Couple weeks after that, those same guys tipped us off about a raid before it happened. See what I mean? You can't buy loyalty with just threats. Sometimes you buy it with dignity. The more I learned, the more I realized the street wasn't about random chaos. It had rules, unspoken but ironclad. Don't talk to the cops unless you're paying them. Don't touch a man's family, no matter what he owes you. Don't make a promise you can't keep, and don't take more than you can hold on to. Break those rules and you wouldn't need to worry about the law wouldn't get to you before the streets did. By the time I was in my early 20s, I had a crew that could move product from the docks to the speakeasies without losing a drop. We had lookouts on every block, a handful of cops who'd tip us off if our name came up, and enough cash flow to keep everyone happy. I didn't know it yet, but this was my undergrad. Prohibition was about to turn New York into a gold mine, and the guys who graduated from the street college with the right connections? They were about to become kings. I remember one night, sitting in the back of a smoke-filled bar, watching Meyer shuffle cards while Benny kept one eye on the door. The place smelled like whiskey and cigars, the kind of scent you never forget. And I thought, this is it. This is the foundation. We're building something here. Not just a hustle. Not just a score. A legacy. I didn't say it out loud, 'cause in our world, talk like that makes you sound like a dreamer. But I kept it in the back of my mind, along with everything else the streets had taught me. Because the day was coming when I'd need every lesson, every connection, every ounce of nerve I'd ever earned. And when that day came, I wasn't gonna just play the game, I was gonna rewrite the rules. When the country went dry, the money started flowing, and every wise guy with a truck became a king. They called it the Noble Experiment. The government thought they could make the country cleaner, more moral, more respectable. They didn't understand people. You take something away they enjoy, something they've built into their lives, and you don't kill the demand. You just change where the money goes. And in 1920, the money started flowing into the shadows. Prohibition was supposed to dry the nation out. Instead, it flooded the streets with opportunity. For guys like me, it was a gift from the heavens if heaven happened to smell like cheap whiskey and gasoline. Overnight, every speakeasy, every backroom club, every private poker table needed a supplier. And not just any supplier, they needed someone who could deliver consistently, quietly, and without getting half his load hijacked along the way. That's where we came in. Meyer handled the numbers. He knew exactly how much product we could move, how much we could risk, and how much we could skim without anyone noticing. Benny was the guy you sent when someone needed convincing, the kind of convincing that left a mark. And me? I was the one who built the routes. I found the dock workers who'd look the other way for a $20 handshake. I made deals with truck drivers who didn't mind talking the long way home. I shook hands with the right cops, the right aldermen, the right customs agents. The first time I saw a speakeasy in full swing, I knew this was gonna be bigger than anything we'd touched before. The place was packed wall to wall, cigarette smoke curling up to the ceiling fans, a jazz band hitting notes that made the crowd sway like the whole room was on the same heartbeat. Waiters slid through the crowd with trays of glasses, not a drop of legal liquor in the place. That first night, I didn't drink. I just watched. Watched the way people laughed harder when they thought they were getting away with something. Watched the way a hostess could get a man to buy 3 more rounds just by brushing his arm. Watched the way the bartender's eyes never stopped moving, keeping track of who was who and where the trouble might start. We moved crates in through the back door that night. No one saw, no one asked. That was the beauty of it, the customers didn't care where it came from, just that it kept coming. Our network started small, a couple of routes, a few reliable customers. But word travels fast in this business. Before long we were moving liquor from the docks in New Jersey to clubs in Harlem, from warehouses in Queens to brownstones in Brooklyn Heights. Some nights we'd move 100 cases, some nights twice that. And the money? It was coming in faster than we could count. But with money comes eyes. Other crews saw what we were doing and wanted a piece. Some tried hijacking our trucks. The first time it happened, Benny and I paid him a visit. We didn't yell, we didn't make a scene. We just explained, very politely, that our trucks weren't open for business. We left them with a reminder they wouldn't forget, and after that, word spread, you don't touch Lucky's product. That didn't mean the trouble stopped. Prohibition turned every hustler with a car into an entrepreneur, and the competition was everywhere. Some crews were sloppy getting raided, losing product, even poisoning customers with bad booze. We kept our operation clean. Meyer made sure the liquor was good. I made sure the routes were safe. Benny made sure nobody got any bright ideas. We weren't just running booze, though. Prohibition opened doors in every direction. A speakeasy that trusted you to deliver liquor would trust you with other things: gambling, girls, even loan sharking. We never pushed it all at once. You plant the seed, you let it grow, and when the time's right, you expand. It was around this time I started meeting bigger players. Arnold Rothstein. Now there was a man who understood the long game. He didn't think small time. He thought in terms of networks, connections, influence. Rothstein didn't just sell booze, he sold safety, discretion, and access. And when he saw that I could deliver, he opened doors I didn't even know existed. One night we met in a hotel suite uptown. The place smelled like cigars and leather, the kind of room where deals get made that never see the inside of a courtroom. Rothstein poured us each a drink, rail scotch, not bathtub gin, and told me something I never forgot: Lucky, the liquor ain't the business. The liquor is the invitation. Once you're in the room, you can sell anything. That was the moment I stopped thinking like a street hustler and started thinking like a businessman. With Rothstein's connections, we streamlined our routes. We cut deals with suppliers in Canada, smuggling liquor down through the Great Lakes and into New York by truck. We bought warehouse space under fake names, kept our inventory moving so nothing sat too long in one place. I learned how to keep the cops busy in one neighborhood while a shipment came through in another. And I learned something else: the more successful we got, the more the old bosses noticed. Guys who'd laughed at me a few years back were now watching me like I was a problem they didn't know how to solve. The thing about Prohibition was it didn't just make new kings. It made old ones nervous. I could feel the tension building. The streets were making more money than they'd ever seen, but that kind of wealth doesn't stay quiet. Everybody wanted their cut. Everybody thought they deserved more. And sooner or later, those feelings were gonna spill into the open. For now, though, we were riding high. The jazz was loud, the bottles were full, and every night ended with more money on the table than we'd started with. But I never let myself get too comfortable. In this business, comfort is just the space between storms. I'd sit in the back of a speakeasy, watching the band play while couples danced under the dim lights, and I'd think about how fragile it all was. One raid, one hijacking, one betrayal, and the whole thing could collapse. That's why I kept my crew close and my eyes open. I wasn't just thinking about the next delivery. I was thinking about the next year, the next 5 years. Because deep down, I knew prohibition wasn't gonna last forever. And when it ended, the guys who'd just been moving liquor would be out of work. But the guys who'd built something bigger? They'd still be standing. So I kept building. Kept learning. Kept watching the board. Because the day was coming when the liquor wouldn't matter, only the power would. And I was making damn sure I'd have both. 1 room. 5 men. And a deal that would rewrite the rules of the underworld forever. By 1922, I was making more money than I'd ever seen in my life. But money's only worth something if it buys you security. And in our world, security came from alliances, the right ones. That's why when Rothstein told me about a sit-down with some of the city's biggest operators, I didn't hesitate. The meeting was in a midtown suite, late on a rainy Thursday. You wouldn't have looked twice at the building from the street, plain brick, no signs, no reason to notice it. But inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke, and the men in that room, they were the kind of people who could make or break you with a nod. Arnold Rothstein was at the head of the table. Calm, steady, like a man who already knew how the night would end. On his right sat Joe Masuria, Joe the boss, a heavy-set Sicilian with sharp eyes and a sharper appetite for control. Across from him was Frankie Yale out of Brooklyn, built like a dockworker and dressed like a banker. Beside Yale, a younger face I knew well, Johnny Torrio from Chicago, who'd been building an empire in the Midwest with his protege, Al Capone. I took a seat near Rothstein, close enough to listen but far enough to look like I was just another set of ears. I wasn't there to talk. Not yet. I was there to learn. Rothstein started the conversation like he always did, smooth, deliberate. Gentlemen, the streets are making us rich, but they're also making us reckless. We're all stepping on each other's toes, and sooner or later that's going to bring heat we can't afford. Nobody interrupted. When Rothstein spoke, you listened. He laid it out plain: the city was big enough for all of us, but only if we acted like businessmen, not street punks. That meant territories, partnerships, shared supply lines, and no more petty hijackings between outfits. If we wanted prohibition to keep making us kings, we had to stop acting like we were fighting over crumbs. Masuria wasn't convinced. He liked things the old way: muscle over brains, fear over trust. He puffed on his cigar and muttered something about Sicilian honor and outsiders knowing their place. By outsiders, he meant guys like me, not born in Sicily, not bound by the old world rules. That's when Torrio spoke up. Times are changing, Joe. In Chicago, we do business with anyone who can deliver. It's not about where a man's from. It's about what he brings to the table. I saw Rothstein glance at me, just for a second. He was planting seeds, not just for the men in that room, but for me. The discussion went on for hours. They argued over routes, suppliers, who'd handle shipments from Canada, who'd take care of distribution in the boroughs. There were veiled threats, a few raised voices, and plenty of promises no one intended to keep. But by the end of the night, they had the beginnings of an understanding. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a truce. And in this business, a truce was gold. After the meeting, Rothstein pulled me aside in the hallway. The rain was still tapping against the windows and the city below glistened under the street lamps. He handed me a drink from a side table and said, "You saw what happened in there, Lucky? That's the future. Not guns, not knives, meetings. Men at a table making deals. If you want to last, you have to think like that." I told him I understood. Truth was, I more than understood, I believed it. I'd been around enough street fights to know that muscle could win you a corner for a day. But alliances? Alliances could win you a city. The weeks after that meeting were different. Doors opened for me that had been closed before. Yale let me move product through his Brooklyn clubs. Torrio offered me access to his Chicago distribution if I could help him in New York. Even Masuria, who'd barely looked at me in the meeting, started sending feelers my way, small jobs, tests to see if I could be useful. It was a dangerous balance. On one hand, I was climbing faster than I'd ever dreamed. On the other, I was now playing in a league where one wrong move could get you erased. Not just killed, erased. Like you'd never been there. Meyer noticed the shift, too. One night over a quiet drink in a backroom, he said, "You're not just moving booze anymore, Charlie. You're moving pieces on a board. And boards have kings and queens, but they also have pawns." I knew what he meant. The old bosses thought they were using me, testing me, keeping me in my place. But I wasn't anyone's pawn. I was studying the board, watching the way the pieces moved, learning how the game was played. Then came the job that proved I belonged at that table. A shipment from Montreal was stuck in Buffalo, bad weather, bad timing, and a customs official who'd suddenly gotten a lot more interested in doing his job. The other crews were nervous. Too much attention at the border could shut down the whole Canadian pipeline. I told Rothstein I'd handle it. He raised an eyebrow, not because he doubted me, but because he knew if I pulled it off my stock would go through the roof. 2 days later, the shipment was in New York. No one asked how I did it, and I didn't offer details. But word got around Lucky could move anything, anywhere, and keep it quiet. That was the moment I stopped being one of Rothstein's guys and started being my own man. The old bosses still thought they were in charge, but now, when I walked into a room, they looked at me a little differently. Like maybe I wasn't just another player, maybe I was someone they'd have to deal with. Looking back, that meeting in the rainy Midtown suite was more than just a sit-down. It was the first step toward something bigger, something that would outlast Prohibition itself. The commission wasn't even an idea yet, not officially. But that night, the blueprint was on the table. And I was already thinking about how to build it. It started with a body in the gutter and ended with every man in the city wondering who'd be next. The truce from that rainy night meeting didn't last long. In our world, truces were like ice in a glass of whiskey, they melted fast, and you were left with something weaker than before. It was February, cold enough to make the East River steam in the mornings. I was coming out of a club in the village when I saw Meyer waiting across the street, hands buried in his coat pockets. One look at his face told me something had gone bad. "Frankie Yale's man," he said, voice low. "They found him on Pier 17 this morning. 2 in the chest, 1 in the back of the head." I didn't need to ask who. Benny Ambert, Yale's top enforcer, the guy who kept the Brooklyn docks locked down tight. Killing him wasn't just murder, it was a message. Yale was furious. Word on the street was he blamed Joe Masuria. Masuria swore it wasn't him, claimed maybe it was some small-time crew trying to muscle in. But no one believed that. This was too clean, too precise. And in our world, precision like that didn't come from nobodies. The ripple effect was immediate. Yale pulled his trucks from Manhattan. Torrio's shipments from Chicago got rerouted to avoid Brooklyn. And the understanding Rothstein had worked so hard to build was suddenly hanging by a thread. That night, Rothstein called me to the plaza. He was sitting in his suite, lights low, a drink in one hand and the city glittering outside the window. "We can't let this turn into a war," he said. "Wars cost money. Too much money." I asked him what he wanted me to do. He smiled, that calm, calculating smile, and said, "Find out who actually did it." Quietly. Easier said than done. In the underworld, truth was like smoke. Everyone saw it, but no one could hold it. Meyer and I started asking around, careful not to let anyone think we were digging too deep. We bought drinks for longshoremen, tipped off dock bosses, slipped a few bills to numbers runners. After a week, a picture started to form, and it didn't point to Mafia. It pointed to a crew out of Jersey working under Salvatore Maranzano. Maranzano was a different breed of boss, old-school Sicilian, sharp as a knife and patient like a hunter. He didn't care about the truce. In fact, breaking it worked in his favor. The more chaos in New York, the easier it would be for him to wedge himself in. But knowing and proving were two different things. If we went to Yale with this and he didn't buy it, we'd be the next ones floating in the river. I decided to go see Maranzano myself. Alone. No fanfare, no show of force. Just me in a cab headed to a quiet little restaurant in the Bronx that he used as his headquarters. The place was dim, smelled of garlic and old wine. Maranzano sat at a corner table, reading a newspaper like he didn't have a care in the world. He looked up when I walked in, studied me for a long second, then waved me over. "Mr. Luciano," he said in thick, deliberate English. "You come to eat, or to talk?" "Both," I told him. We ordered pasta. We talked about the weather, baseball, the new Italian bakery down the street. Only after the plates were cleared did I lean in and say, "I hear some of your boys have been making trouble on the docks." His eyes didn't change, but the air between us got heavier. Trouble? Or opportunity? That was the thing about Maranzano, he didn't lie. Not exactly. He just framed the truth in a way that suited him. "I'm not here to threaten you," I said. "I'm here to make sure this doesn't spiral into something that costs all of us." He smiled faintly. "Spiral, yes. That is what happens when too many men want the same crown." We left it there. No admissions, no denials. But I walked out of that restaurant knowing two things: one, Maranzano was playing a long game, and two, this wasn't over. Back in Manhattan, Yale wasn't in a forgiving mood. If it was him, he growled, "I'm not waiting for an apology. I'm sending a message back." That's when I had to make a choice: step back and let the old bosses go at each other, or step in and risk everything to keep the streets from exploding. I chose to step in. Not because I cared about peace, but because chaos was bad for business and I had too much business on the line. Meyer and I put together a plan. If we could arrange a face-to-face between Yale and Maranzano under controlled terms, maybe we could buy some breathing room. Rothstein agreed to host it at one of his uptown gambling rooms, with enough muscle around to keep anyone from pulling a trigger. It was tense from the start. Yale walked in stiff and cold, Maranzano cool and polite. Rothstein opened with his usual diplomacy, talking about profits and supply chains, about how killing each other wouldn't fill anyone's pockets. The meeting lasted 2 hours. They didn't shake hands at the end, but neither man stormed out, and for now, that was enough. For the next few weeks, the city held its breath. No bodies turned up in alleys. No trucks went missing. But the calm didn't feel real. It felt like the pause before a storm. One night, sitting in the back of a smoky club with Meyer, I said, "This isn't gonna hold. They're both too proud. One spark and the whole thing goes up." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time you start thinking about who's gonna be left standing when it does." That was when it hit me: I couldn't just be a player in someone else's game anymore. If I wanted to survive the wars that were coming, and make no mistake, they were coming, I had to start building something of my own. Something bigger than a crew, bigger than a neighborhood. Something untouchable. That idea, the seed of what would one day become the commission, started right there in that haze of smoke and cheap whiskey, with blood still drying on the docks and everyone pretending they were friends. Because in our world, peace was just another word for preparation. A man don't become a king overnight, he builds a kingdom one quiet handshake at a time. The thing about the old bosses, Mafia, Yale, Maranzano, was they thought power lived in a corner office or a smoke-filled backroom. They measured control in bodies, in bullets, in how many soldiers would take a slug for them. I measured it in something different: connections. Invisible threads tying the right men together so tight that no matter who took a fall, the whole net still held. Meyer understood it immediately. "You're talking about something bigger than just a crew," he said one night over cards. "Something that doesn't look like power but acts like it." That's exactly what I wanted. I didn't need my name on every racket, I just needed a cut of all of them, and a seat at every table where the real decisions got made. We started small. A bartender on Mulberry Street who owed me a favor. A union man in the garment district Meyer had been slipping envelopes to for years. A numbers runner in Harlem with a gift for keeping books cleaner than a bank's. Each one connected to someone else. Each one owed me something. It wasn't glamorous work. No gunfights, no dramatic meetings. Just a lot of listening, a lot of quiet deals. But piece by piece, the net grew. I paid attention to the immigrants just arriving from Italy, the young ones, hungry for work, for a chance. They didn't want to spend 10 years carrying crates for a dock boss who'd never learn their names. I offered them something faster, steady money, protection, a way up the ladder. Some came to me because they respected me. Others because they feared crossing me. Either way, they stayed loyal. The unions were the real key. Control the unions, you controlled the ports, the trucks, the warehouses. You controlled who worked and who didn't. That meant leverage you could trade with other bosses or use to choke them out if you had to. Meyer and I approached the dockworkers union like investors. We didn't bust heads, we bought influence. Paid for sick funds, paid for funerals, paid for lost shipments that somehow ended up in our warehouses instead of the rightful owners. Every handshake, every quiet nod was another strand in the web. By the spring, I was sitting in on meetings I'd never been invited to before, talks between bosses from Jersey, Brooklyn, even Philadelphia. I kept my mouth shut, let them underestimate me. That was fine. A man they don't fear is a man they don't guard against. Still, not everyone liked what they saw. Joe Masuria had been watching me, and I could tell he was starting to wonder if I was getting too big for my boots. One night he called me to a club in Little Italy. It was loud inside, the kind of place where the music covers the sound of bad business. He sat at a corner table, a cigar smoldering between his fingers. "You're making a lot of friends, Charlie," he said without looking at me. "Friends I don't remember introducing you to." I smiled. "Just keeping the peace, Joe. Making sure everyone gets along." He chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Don't forget who brought you into this game. And don't forget where loyalty lies." I didn't forget. I just had a different idea of loyalty. In my mind, it wasn't about serving one man until you dropped. It was about serving the future, making sure you were still standing when the dust settled. After that meeting, I moved even quieter. Kept deals off the books. Used intermediaries so nothing traced back to me unless I wanted it to. If someone tried to cut one of my strings, they'd find 3 more holding the same man in place. It wasn't just Italians, either. I brought in Jewish bookmakers, Irish dock bosses, even a couple of crooked cops who liked the way I tipped. Ethnic lines meant nothing to me, only loyalty did. That made me different. Meyer called it the modern way, I called it common sense. The real test came when a dispute broke out over a warehouse in Hell's Kitchen. 3 crews claimed it, and each one was ready to start a shooting war. Instead, I stepped in, offered to buy the lease outright, then rent it back to them all at a discount. They got their space, I got steady rent, and nobody had to bury their friends. That's when I realized the real power of the web. It let me solve problems other bosses couldn't, problems they didn't even want to touch. And every time I fixed something, my thread in their world got a little tighter. By summer, the web stretched from the Bronx to Coney Island. And the beauty of it was, most people didn't even see it. They just saw a friendly face, a man willing to help, someone who could make things happen. But I knew the truth, the stronger the web got, the more dangerous it became to anyone who thought about cutting me out. Meyer and I would sit in a back room late at night, going over lists, names, favors owed. It's not just about now, he'd say, tapping the paper. It's about 5 years from now, 10. Where these people will be, what they'll control. I'd nod because I could see it too. The old bosses didn't think that far ahead. They thought about the next shipment, the next payout, the next hit. But me? I was already building the thing that would outlive all of them. The funny part was, in public, nothing looked different. I still took orders from Mafia. Still showed respect to Yale. Still played cards with Rothstein. But underneath, the city was changing and they didn't even know it yet. The web was there, strong and quiet, and I was right at the center. Because in this business, the man at the center doesn't have to pull every string. He just has to make sure every string leads back to him. Some funerals are for the dead. This one was for the living, to see who'd grab the crown before the body was cold. November 1928. The city was waking up to the first real frost of the season when the news hit. Arnold Rothstein, the brain, the fixer, the man who could turn a card game into an empire, was dead. Shot in the gut over a poker debt he refused to pay. They said he lingered for hours in the hospital, refusing to name his killer. That was Rothstein to the end, never give the cops a thing, never show weakness. For me, the world tilted that morning. Arnold wasn't just a boss or a bankroll. He was the guy who'd taught me the real game. How money was cleaner than blood. How a favor paid today could be worth 10 bullets tomorrow. I heard about it from Meyer. He came in early, coat still frosted from the wind. They got him, he said, and for a second the room felt smaller. Who? I asked. Doesn't matter, Meyer replied. What matters is the hole it leaves. And he was right. Rothstein wasn't just a man, he was a hub. Every racket in the city had some line running back to him. Gambling, bootlegging, loan sharking, politics, you name it. He was the invisible glue holding things together. Without him, everyone would be sniffing for weakness. The funeral was 2 days later, and I knew it wouldn't just be about paying respects. It'd be about positioning. Who stood next to who? Who shook hands? Who didn't show at all? It was cold, the kind of cold that bites through wool. The streets outside the synagogue were packed, big shots in long coats, small-time hustlers trying to look bigger than they were, reporters looking for a headline. I walked in with Meyer and Lansky, the three of us side by side. We kept our eyes forward, but I could feel the glances. People wondering what the Brains boys were gonna do now. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and whispers. The coffin sat at the front, draped in black. Rothstein looked smaller in death, like all the calculation had drained out of him. We stood for a while, watching the room. Joe Mafia was there, jaw tight, pretending not to care. Dutch Schultz too, looking like he wanted to pick the place clean before the service even started. From the back I spotted Bugsy Siegel, restless as ever, like he was already thinking 3 moves ahead. The rabbi spoke about legacy, about honor, about the kind of man Rothstein was. But in my head, I was thinking about territory. About who'd move in on his casinos, his loan books, his political connections. After the service, the real meeting happened outside. The cold air made every breath look like smoke. Men clustered in little knots, voices low, eyes scanning. Mafia was quick to corner me. Tough break, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. But the game goes on. You should stick close. Make sure your interests stay protected. Translation: come under my wing. Let him scoop up whatever was left of Rothstein's operation. I smiled politely. I appreciate that, Joe. But Arnold taught me to take care of my own. His eyes narrowed just a fraction. He didn't like that answer. Meyer and I moved through the crowd, talking to bookies, casino managers, even a couple of city councilmen who owed Rothstein favors. It wasn't about making deals right there, it was about showing the flag, reminding them we were still in the picture. Dutch Schultz made his move fast. I heard him pitching Rothstein's runners before the coffin was even in the ground, promising them bigger cuts, faster payouts. The man had no patience or shame. Bugsy drifted over at one point, hands in his pockets. "You boys thinking about picking up where he left off?" he asked, smirking. "We're thinking about keeping things stable," Meyer said flatly. Bugsy grinned. "Stability's overrated." Then he walked off, probably to start a fight somewhere. As the crowd thinned, the lines became clearer. Some guys would stick with Masuria. Others would take Dutch's money. A few would hedge their bets, waiting to see who came out on top. For me, the funeral confirmed something I'd been feeling for months: the old way was cracking. The bosses were still playing checkers while the board was turning into chess. Rothstein had been the rare one who could see the whole game, and now he was gone. That night, Meyer and I sat in a backroom, a bottle between us. We went over every name, every connection, figuring out who was drifting, who was desperate, who could be bought. "We can't take everything," Meyer said. "Not yet." "We don't have to," I told him. "We just need the right pieces. The ones that let us pull the rest when the time's right." It was the same web I'd been building, only now Rothstein's threads were dangling loose, ready to be tied into mine. The thing about funerals in our world? They're not an ending. They're an opening. And if you're smart, you don't just send flowers. You send out feelers. By the end of the week, I had my hands in 3 of Rothstein's smaller rackets. Nothing flashy, just enough to plant a flag. Meyer handled the books, Lansky kept the payments flowing, and we made sure no one could pin any of it directly on us. Let Masuria and Dutch fight over the big prizes. While they bled each other dry, I'd be tightening the net. Rothstein once told me, "Charlie, the smart play isn't the one everyone sees. It's the one nobody notices until it's too late." At his funeral, standing in the cold surrounded by men ready to cut each other's throats, I realized just how right he was. Wars don't start with bullets, they start with whispers, and in 1929 the whispers had Maranzano's name all over them. By early '29, New York felt like a pot ready to boil over. Rothstein's death hadn't just left a gap in the rackets, it had torn a hole in the balance of power. Joe Masuria was trying to plug it with muscle and intimidation. Dutch Schultz was trying to flood it with cash. But out of the shadows came a different kind of player, Salvatore Maranzano. I'd heard the name before. Sicilian. Old school. Ran a tight crew out of Castellamare del Golfo back in the old country. Over here, he was supposed to be keeping quiet, running a modest operation in Brooklyn. But somehow, every week someone new was whispering about him, how he was moving into bootlegging territory, how he had soldiers slipping into crews that used to answer to Masuria. Meyer said it best: he's playing chess while everyone else is throwing dice. I first met Maranzano in a backroom of a Bronx bakery. He had this way of making you feel like you were already in his game the moment you shook his hand. He talked slow, like every word was a move. Told stories about Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, then slid right into talk about controlling the docks. It wasn't bragging, it was teaching. Like he thought of himself as a general and the rest of us as captains who hadn't realized we'd enlisted. Masuria hated him. Saw him as an upstart who didn't know his place. But Masuria had a problem: his idea of keeping power was to make people afraid. That works for a while, but fear burns fast. Respect lasts longer, and Maranzano knew how to get it. The war didn't come all at once. It started with quiet strikes. A truck of Masuria's liquor gets hijacked. A bookmaker who paid Masuria suddenly starts paying Maranzano instead. A city official who used to take Joe's bribe switches allegiance. Nobody claims it, but everyone knows. I stayed out of the early moves. Let them circle each other while I built my own crew tighter. Meyer kept telling me, "Patience, Charlie. The longer they fight, the weaker they get." He was right, but there's a danger in waiting too long. Eventually both sides start looking at the middle and wonder whose side you're on. One night I got the call. Masuria wanted me at a sit-down. When I got there, he was already red in the face, pounding the table. This Maranzano thinks he can spit in my face. He's taking my men, my money. He leaned in close. Charlie, you're with me. You've always been with me. But now I need you to prove it. I knew what that meant. He wanted me to throw my weight against Maranzano, not just business, but blood. The thing was, I'd met Maranzano, and I'd seen something in him I didn't see in Masuria, vision. Discipline. The man thought in structures, in systems, not just shakedowns. He could see a future beyond the street corner. So I played it careful. Told Masuria I'd look into it, by some time, see where the wind was really blowing. A week later, I had dinner with Maranzano. He served wine from his own vineyard in Sicily, poured it himself. He didn't ask me to fight Masuria, he just painted a picture of what things could be. A new order, he called it. 5 families, each with their own territory, all working together, no petty wars, no wasted blood. It sounded clean. Cleaner than the mess we had now. But I knew better than to think it would be bloodless. To get to that table, someone had to clear it first. By spring, the streets were running hot. Drive-bys in the Bronx. Ambushes in Brooklyn. Restaurants bombed just for who might be eating inside. You couldn't walk 2 blocks without feeling like you were being watched. Meyer kept us focused. We took on small but profitable jobs, bootlegging routes, protection on the garment trucks, nothing flashy enough to draw fire, but enough to keep our pockets full and our soldiers loyal. We made sure to quietly help guys on both sides when it suited us. A loan to a Masuria capo here, a tip to a Maranzano soldier there. It wasn't about loyalty, it was about leverage. One night, Meyer and I sat in a safe apartment, maps of the city spread out on the table. We marked out who controlled what now, who might control it after a few months of war. It looked like a chessboard, and the middle squares were all open. You see it, Charlie? Meyer asked. I nodded. Yeah. They're too busy going for the king to guard the center. That's when it clicked. I didn't have to win this war. I just had to make sure that when it ended, both kings were too weak to stop me from taking the board. By summer, Maranzano made a bold move. He took out one of Masuria's top earners in broad daylight. It sent a message, not just to Joe, but to everyone watching. This was a man willing to swing the sword himself. The retaliation came fast. Masuria's men hit 3 Maranzano spots in one night. Bootleg warehouses burned, bodies dumped in the river. The city papers called it the bootleg war, but anyone who knew the game understood this was a war for the soul of the underworld. I kept my crew close, moving them like pieces. Never in the open, always in positions where we could see the moves before they hit us. Meyer handled the money so clean it could pass for stock investments. Lansky made sure our political friends stayed friendly. Bugsy made sure no one got too close without regretting it. By the fall, I could see both sides bleeding. Masuria was losing men faster than he could replace them. Maranzano had taken ground, but at a cost. His old world loyalty couldn't always buy new world muscle. That's when I started thinking about the endgame. 2 kings, 1 board, and me, the player neither of them had been watching closely enough. In the quiet moments, I remembered Rothstein's advice: the smart play isn't the one everyone sees. I wasn't gonna throw in with either side completely. I was gonna let them wear each other down until one of them was desperate enough to deal, and then I'd make the deal that ended the war on my terms. The city was changing. The old Sicilian codes, the street corner bosses, the handshake deals, they were giving way to something bigger, more structured, more American. And I was ready to be the man at the center of it. Loyalty in this game is a luxury, and I was about to bankrupt the concept entirely. By late 1930, the city was a war zone, and everyone was looking at me. Not because I had fired a gun or taken a warehouse or publicly challenged the old bosses. No, they were watching because I was invisible, the quiet man who always had a hand in every profitable operation without ever getting blood on his own gloves. I knew both Masuria and Maranzano wanted me on their side. Each saw value in my organization, my network, my ability to move men and money with surgical precision. But neither realized that I could play them both, not recklessly, not dangerously, but carefully. Every promise, every handshake, every whispered word could be turned into leverage. Meyer called it the double cross, but I didn't see it that way. I saw it as chess, as strategy. You don't throw pawns at kings, you move the kings into position so the pawns don't even matter. The first step was Masuria. He called me to a speakeasy in the East Village, the kind of place where the air smells of whiskey and cigar smoke, where the waiters pretend not to notice the guns under coats. Masuria didn't beat around the bush. Charlie, you're with me, you understand? These Maranzano boys are bleeding the city dry. I want you solidly on my side. I nodded, as carefully neutral as I could manage. Joe, I'm with you. Whatever you need. He smiled, satisfied. Then came Maranzano. A week later, we met in a quiet Brooklyn backroom. He was polite, deliberate, the old-school Sicilian charm still in every movement. Charlie, I understand you've been working with others, he said, voice even, eyes sharp. But I want loyalty. You help me finish this war and we can bring order to New York. I leaned in, soft voice. You have my loyalty, Sal. Whatever it takes. Both sides believed I was fully committed. And that's how I kept the real play hidden. From that point, every move was about timing and perception. Masuria needed me to strike a warehouse Maranzano controlled. I did, but carefully. Just enough to satisfy Masuria, just enough to make Maranzano think I was still loyal to him. In return, Maranzano needed men to intercept shipments Masuria's men were trying to hijack. I supplied them. Every move calculated, every action creating the illusion of allegiance while the real plan stayed in my head. The city burned quietly around me, streets lit by arson docks, gunfights in narrow alleys, bodies turning up in rivers and backstreets. Each side thought I was helping them, but really I was letting them destroy each other while keeping my network intact. Meyer stayed close. One slip, Charlie, he said over a drink one night, and both sides will know what you're doing. One wrong glance and you're dead. I smiled. That was the point. The danger made the game thrilling. The risk sharpened every move. It also meant that when the time came, they'd trust me enough to walk into a trap. The real breakthrough came when Maranzano and Masuria agreed to a sit-down to negotiate a truce. Rothstein's old vision of a commission-like peace was finally being discussed, though neither side realized I had the keys to the room. I orchestrated the meeting carefully, suggesting the location, controlling who entered, making sure everyone's men were accounted for but restrained. The night of the meeting, I watched both bosses arrive. Masuria confident, chewing a cigar, eyes scanning for threats. Maranzano, composed, calculating, nodding politely to allies. Both thought they were in control, both underestimated me. I arranged it so that Masuria's men were slightly delayed, a subtle move I knew would frustrate him but wouldn't arouse suspicion. Maranzano's soldiers were in place but not aggressive enough to be a silent reminder of power. The balance was delicate, I could feel the tension in the room like a live wire. And then the strike was set. I didn't pull a trigger. I didn't swing a knife. I just positioned everyone to trust me implicitly and let the moment of decision come to them. Both sides would wear each other down while I emerged untouched. Meanwhile, Meyer and Lansky were consolidating my finances. Every transaction, every payment, every favor owed was mapped. By the time the dust settled, I would have both bosses indebted to me, both aware that I could either destroy them or protect them. Every night was a careful dance. Walk down the street and avoid surveillance from both crews. Keep a low profile in public. Let Bugsy handle threats discreetly. Make the right phone calls at the right time. Send the right message to the right lieutenant. All of it had to feel natural, organic. Otherwise, suspicion would rise, and suspicion in this game meant death. The beauty of the double cross is that it doesn't feel like betrayal until the final move. You give each side enough to believe they control you, and then when the moment comes, you reveal that control was yours all along. By late 1930, the casualties had piled up. Dozens of men on both sides had been killed or wounded. Entire shipments of liquor were lost, entire territories shifted. The city was tense, alive with fear and expectation. And in the eye of that storm, my crew thrived. I remember one night, sitting in a quiet speakeasy with Meyer and Lansky, watching the chaos play out. "How many more you think?" Meyer asked. "Just enough to make the next move perfect," I replied. "They'll see me last, and by then it'll be too late to stop me." Bugsy laughed quietly in the corner. "You really are crazy, Charlie. Playing both sides like this could get you killed." I took a sip of whiskey. "That's the point, Bugs. Risk is what separates the men from the boys." The final move came in early 1931. Masuria had grown impatient, calling for an all-out strike on Maranzano. Maranzano responded with careful precision, taking out Masuria's top lieutenants while leaving him exposed. I was there orchestrating the pieces, guiding outcomes without anyone realizing it. The night Masuria fell, it wasn't me who pulled the trigger, but I made sure the circumstances were right. Every angle, every escape route, every ally position so that the final act cemented my power without a single misstep. When it was over, I walked away untouched. Masuria was gone. Maranzano's power weakened but intact, and the city streets finally quiet, though only temporarily. In that silence, I knew the game had changed forever. Loyalty was no longer a simple concept. Power was no longer defined by fear alone. And I was the man at the center of it all. The double cross had worked. But more than that, it had proven a principle in the underworld: perception is reality, and the man who controls perception controls the city. And that was exactly what I intended to do. Power isn't taken, it's built. And by 1931, I was building something no one could ignore. The streets were quiet for the first time in years, but quiet doesn't mean safe. Masuria was gone, yes, but the city's underworld was still fractured, simmering with resentment, suspicion, and the promise of revenge. And I knew that if I wanted lasting peace, the kind that let business thrive without constant bloodshed, I had to do more than survive. I had to reshape the game entirely. Meyer and I began drafting plans quietly, mapping the new structure for New York. Not just a temporary truce, but an organization designed to prevent wars before they started, a network of families, each with defined territories, clear rules, and a council of bosses to arbitrate disputes, what we would come to call the Commission. The old bosses didn't like it. Maranzano, despite his brilliance, wanted absolute control. The Sicilian in him couldn't imagine sharing power. I humored him, talked about cooperation and respect, but the truth was different. Cooperation wasn't about equality, it was about survival. And in this survival, I had to be the one who orchestrated the board. I met with each remaining family boss individually: Joe Bonanno, Stefano Megadino, Vito Genovese, men with history, pride, and ambitions. I listened more than I spoke, gauging their motivations, testing their loyalty. By the time I presented the concept of the commission, I didn't just have approval, I had commitment. Every family agreed because they understood one truth: the alternative was chaos, and chaos was death. The real work began behind the scenes. Territories had to be redrawn. Rackets restructured. Enforcers reassigned. Every business, from gambling dens to bootlegging routes, required careful negotiation. One misstep, one man feeling slighted, and the fragile peace would collapse before it even began. I remember sitting in a backroom office with Meyer, maps and ledgers spread across a scarred wooden table. "It's delicate," he said. "One wrong move and someone dies. I poured a drink and nodded. Delicate is fine. Delicate keeps people on their toes. They'll respect me more for it. And respect was the currency we were building. Not fear, fear fades. Respect lasts generations. The first test came almost immediately. A dispute arose between the Luciano crew and a smaller outfit trying to muscle into Harlem. Normally, this would have ended in violence. But with the commission framework in place, I mediated. I listened, brokered concessions, offered alternative revenue streams, and walked away with both sides satisfied and my authority strengthened. Meyer handled the finances, ensuring every transaction, every payment, every tribute reinforced the network. Lansky advised on strategy, using his connections to smooth tensions across ethnic lines. Jewish, Italian, Irish, everyone needed a piece of the new order. Bugsy, of course, enforced quietly but efficiently. Maranzano, however, was a problem. His ego didn't allow for sharing the spotlight. He wanted to be king, not councilman. I let him believe he was indispensable, gave him minor wins, but positioned him carefully. Every step he took was predictable, and by understanding his psychology, I knew when to push, when to hold back, when to strike. The pivotal moment came in September 1931. Maranzano called a meeting, ostensibly to discuss territory boundaries. He sat at the head of the table, confident, surrounded by his loyal captains. I walked in calmly, acknowledging him politely. But I didn't just walk in to negotiate, I walked in to neutralize a threat. The men at the table were surprised when I revealed that Masuria's loyalists had already aligned with me. That my network was now broader, stronger, and better organized than any single family could match. Maranzano realized too late that he had overestimated his control. It wasn't a shootout. It wasn't an ambush. It was an elegant execution of strategy. Maranzano understood he had lost and, more importantly, that continuing resistance would be suicidal. By the end of the meeting, he was contained, his power diminished, and the framework of the commission intact. From that point on, the families recognized the new order. Each operated independently, but major decisions, disputes, large-scale rackets, alliances went through the council. No one family could dominate. Violence was minimized. Profits maximized. Stability, at last, became the currency of the underworld. I watched it all from the center. Every member of my network owed loyalty to me, not out of fear but out of necessity. The men knew the game, and they knew the stakes. Every move they made reinforced my position. Every dispute passed through my channels. Every alliance, every payout, every whisper of power led back to the web I had constructed. The city itself felt different. Streets that had once run red were calmer. Bootlegging routes functioned smoothly. Casinos and nightclubs thrived without interruption. Even law enforcement, who had once seen me as just another racketeer, now had to contend with a system too structured to ignore. I didn't stop building. Even as the commission rose, I continued expanding my reach into New Jersey, Chicago, and beyond. The principles stayed the same: structure, loyalty, and leverage. Nothing flashy, nothing reckless. Every move deliberate, every action calculated. Meyer said once, "You've turned the streets into a machine." I smiled, thinking of every quiet deal, every careful conversation, every whispered promise. Machines, I said, don't bleed. They keep running. By 1932, the commission wasn't just a concept, it was reality. 5 families working under rules that made sense, enforced by men who understood the cost of chaos. And at the center of it, guiding every decision, every alliance, every potential conflict, was me, Charles Lucky Luciano. I had taken the lessons of Rothstein, the chaos of Masuria, the precision of Maranzano, and distilled them into something enduring. Not just control over men, but control over systems, influence, and the very structure of organized crime in America. And that's how, in a city that had once thrived on violence and fear, I built order, a new order. Because in this life, survival isn't about being the strongest, the fastest, or the cruelest. It's about seeing the game others can't, moving pieces they don't even know exist, and being patient enough to let the city itself play into your hands. The streets whispered my name quietly at first. Then louder. By the end, every boss, every soldier, every aspiring gangster knew the game had changed. And Lucky Luciano was the man who changed it. The streets never forget a king, and by the time the dust settled, everyone knew who had built the throne. By the mid-1930s, New York had changed in ways few could fully understand. The chaos of the Castellamarese War was over, the streets quieter, the gunfights less frequent, and the city's underworld had settled into a new rhythm, one dictated not by brute force alone but by structure, negotiation, and the invisible hand of influence. I watched it all from the center, not with arrogance, but with calculation. Every family, Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese, now had its territory, its income, and its autonomy. Yet every major decision flowed through a council I helped shape, a network I had built from whispers, quiet favors, and careful observation. The commission wasn't just a governing body, it was a framework of stability, one that ensured the city's criminal enterprises could thrive without the incessant bloodshed of the past. Meyer and I often sat in the same backroom offices we had used during the war, the maps of New York spread across the table now marked with the territories and networks that had once been chaotic battlegrounds. "It's working," Meyer said one night, lighting his cigar. "The streets are quieter, the men know their place." "You did it, Charlie." I nodded, sipping my whiskey, but I didn't allow myself to feel complete satisfaction. There was always more to do, always a next move. A true king never rests, he adapts. He ensures that when tomorrow comes, he's still the center of the game. The beauty of the commission wasn't just in controlling men. It was in controlling perception. To the public, the mob was a shadowy menace, chaotic and unpredictable. But internally, it ran like a machine. Payment streams were predictable. Conflicts were mediated. Territories respected. And the men, many of whom had once fought and killed over minor slights, now understood the bigger picture: cooperation was profit, and stability was survival. Even Maranzano, who had once sought absolute control, understood the reality. After his initial resistance, he accepted his role within the commission not as a king, but as a respected council member. The old Sicilian ways had given him power, but my vision gave him security. And in that trade-off, I demonstrated the fundamental lesson of leadership in our world: power is strongest when it is shared, carefully wielded, strategically, and never taken for granted. The Five Families became more than just criminal organizations. They became institutions, enduring, resilient, and disciplined. They had hierarchies, protocols, and even codes of ethics that paradoxically ensured fewer men died over petty disputes. It was ironic, really, the bloodiest years produced the most stable era. I often reflected on the men who had shaped me: Rothstein, Masuria, Maranzano. Each had taught me something vital. Rothstein taught me subtlety and leverage. Masuria, through his violence and short-sightedness, taught me what not to do. Maranzano, with his precision and structure, taught me foresight. I distilled those lessons into a philosophy that guided every decision, every deal, every alliance. The streets whispered my name quietly at first, then louder. In speakeasies, on docks, in back alleys and offices, people spoke of Lucky Luciano not just as a man but as an idea, a force capable of transforming chaos into order. Respect, more than fear, became my currency. Men paid attention because they knew that those who underestimated me would eventually pay a price, not always directly, but in opportunities lost, alliances broken, and fortunes missed. Even the law noticed. Federal agents, local police, and politicians began to recognize a new reality: organized crime wasn't just random violence anymore, it was a structured, almost corporate entity. And though they called for arrests, investigations, and reforms, the framework of the commission was resilient enough that it could absorb shocks, adapt, and continue. Meyer and Lansky, my closest allies, were instrumental in this transformation. Meyer ensured that the finances were clean, legible, and enforceable, creating a network that made it difficult for rivals or the government to interfere without significant risk. Lansky handled strategy, smoothing ethnic and regional tensions, ensuring that the diverse membership of the commission worked in harmony rather than chaos. Bugsy, ever the enforcer, maintained order quietly, ensuring loyalty and discipline without creating unnecessary attention. Together, we weren't just surviving, we were building something enduring. By the late 1930s, the city's underworld had stabilized in a way previously unimaginable. The five families had their territories, their revenue streams, their alliances. The commission functioned, disputes were mediated, and even the occasional violent conflict was contained. The model spread, influencing organized crime beyond New York, Chicago, New Jersey, and eventually cities across the United States adapted versions of the structure we had implemented. But beyond the business, there was something deeper. I had created a legacy not of wealth alone, not of fear alone, but of influence, foresight, and control. A system where power didn't need to be flaunted with bullets and bombings, but where it was embedded in strategy, respect, and the careful orchestration of people and resources. Even in reflection, I understood the fragility of such power. A single misstep, one betrayal, one unguarded moment could unravel the entire structure. That knowledge kept me vigilant, disciplined, and careful. But it also affirmed the brilliance of the system we had created. By institutionalizing order and embedding rules, we had made the underworld far more durable than any single boss could have done alone. As I walked the streets of New York in those years, observing the quiet efficiency of operations, I understood that my influence had become invisible yet omnipresent. No longer was I merely a man controlling men, I was a force shaping outcomes, guiding decisions, and determining the flow of an entire network. The five families and the commission that united them were living proof of a principle I had always believed: power endures when it is smart, structured, and subtle. And yet I never forgot the human cost. Every gain, every victory had come at a price: men killed, families torn apart, alliances betrayed. But history remembers the architect, not the casualties. The streets remember the order, not the chaos. And so the myth of Lucky Luciano grew, intertwined with the reality of the world I had built. By the end of the decade, the system was in place, the city stable under its new order, and my name firmly etched into the mythology of organized crime. Future generations would tell stories of my rise, the wars I survived, the alliances I brokered, and the structure I left behind. And though the men might change, the principles would endure: strategy over impulse, loyalty over fear, and vision over short-term gain. The five families became more than crime syndicates. They became institutions, enduring beyond the lifespans of individual bosses. And at the center of it all, orchestrating, guiding, and influencing, stood me, Charles Lucky Luciano. The streets never forgot a king. And by the time the dust settled, everyone knew who had built the throne. The city's underworld, once fragmented and blood-soaked, had been transformed. Wars were replaced by negotiations, random violence replaced by strategy, chaos replaced by a system that endured. And the man who had made it all possible, invisible in plain sight, respected, feared, and remembered long after the gun smoke cleared.